Hi there, my name is Mackenzie Adrians, and I work in the Career Development Center here at the University of Louisville. And today I'm going to be presenting some resume and interviewing techniques to help you be successful at the college level, which you will soon be. So as you can see on this first slide, this is the beautiful University of Louisville, and so let's get going. And just let me know throughout if you have any questions, and I'll be sure to look at those and answer any questions you might have. Alrighty. So here at the University of Louisville, we do have a Career Development Center. It's located in the Houchins building, which is actually the yellow brick building. Once you get to campus, you won't be able to miss it or forget it. And it's right by the parking structure. We're in the basement of that building, and you can come to us for all sorts of questions you might have, especially coming into college. It can be stressful figuring out what you want to do, what you want to focus on and study and do for the rest of your life. So we help with everything from career exploration to career preparation, which exploration is more of the individualized coaching. So you meet with one of the career coaches, and we can talk about individual interests and skills that you might have or things that you might value. If you had a favorite class in high school that you want to pursue professionally, we can talk all about that. And then there's the experiential education side of having a career, which you might not have heard that term before. It's really based in the word experience. So you might have had a job you might really enjoy, being a student athlete in high school, or babysitting, something like that. It's getting experience that's really going to help you in your future figure out what you want to do. So we want to make sure you get those experiences in college as well. And then there's the career preparation side. So once you've 100% decided, I want to be a biology major, or I want to be justice administration, we can help you with writing resumes, interviewing, networking, and then the job search, or maybe even internships, things like that. So we're going to be talking about more of the preparation side today. So you may have had some information about resumes in high school, and what I'll tell you to begin any resume presentation is that there really isn't one correct way to do a resume. I have different opinions than other professionals in my office, and they have different opinions than I do, and what I will say is that there are plenty of things that you can do wrong on a resume, to be honest. So we'll talk about some of those things today, but when it comes to formatting and the order of things, there are some general rules that we follow. So just keep that in mind, that if you decide to put experience before education on your resume, some people might say, no, that's wrong, and other people might agree with you. So just keep that in mind. There's no one right way to do the resume. So when I meet with students, there are some common resume mistakes that I see a lot. And especially, like I said, with students, I see a lot of typos, a lot of grammatical errors, things spelled incorrectly, or and that's really the easiest thing to fix on a resume. So just keep that in mind, that that could be solved through some easy having proofreading, having someone else look at that resume for you. And then having too much information on your resume as well. I have students that have come in and presented their resume to me, and they just have paragraphs of information. As you think about it, most employers or most schools that you might be interviewing with, they don't have the time to look through books and pages of resumes and descriptions of what you've done. So we want to keep that information concise, typically in a bullet point format. And I'll show you some examples of that in a little bit. The other side of when I meet with students is they tend to not list their experiences. So you might say, I worked as a server at a restaurant. Well, what did that actually include? Did you make schedules for other employees? Did you, communicate with customers on a daily basis? Was it over the phone? Was it in person? So those are some of the things that I mean by including actual experiences that you had in those roles. And then it comes to the formatting thing. So a poor layout or poor design if things aren't consistent. If you have one of your headers on your resume is in bold and the other one's underlined, it's just going to make it more difficult for either employers or whoever's hiring you to do something to find that information. Alrighty, so let's move on. And so to start your resume, if this is the first time you've ever created a resume, or if you have some things to update since your earlier high school experience, what I do to make it easier is to actually just make a big list. So writing down all of the experiences that I've had, whether it's a seasonal job like during the holidays, or if I was a camp counselor or something like that, and then any involvement that I have too. So any clubs or organizations, being a student athlete like I mentioned, and community service as well. You can list that all on that list. And if you just have a separate document that's a list, it makes it a lot easier to organize. So sometimes you'll take certain things from that list, other times you'll leave it off your resume. So it's just nice to have that separate list. You don't have to worry about formatting. This next slide talks about some of the top qualities that at least employers look for on a resume. And so especially leadership, taking initiative, things like that, problem-solving skills, being able to communicate, whether it's verbal skills or written skills, working on a team, so collaboration, being able to analyze, and then taking initiative, which also is kind of tied in with leadership. So I would say you don't necessarily have to mention each of these things verbatim. So you don't have to say, I'm a great leader, or I have great problem-solving skills. But these are some of the qualities that should be evident through your descriptions. So instead of saying I'm a great leader, if you were the captain of the soccer team, or if you were the treasurer of National Honor Society, things like that can demonstrate to employers or whoever's hiring you that you're a great leader. So keep that in mind when you're making that list. What are the types of things I should even include on my resume? These are some great qualities. So now we actually get to the building stage of resumes. So you can see here, and I'll go through each of these sections, that obviously resumes are organized in different sections. So kind of like I mentioned in the beginning, you'll hear some different opinions about what should be first and what should be last. So if you want my opinion on things, definitely feel free to ask a question throughout, and I'll definitely take a look at these questions as this goes along. So the first section on a resume is your header information, your contact information. Really straightforward. Just make sure that your name is really evident, that it's larger than the rest of the information in the resume, so it really stands out. Your contact information, so your address, and then a phone number you can be reached, and your email address. Two things to remember when it comes to your contact information is that if you list a phone number, obviously you should, make sure that the voicemail is appropriate, that it's not maybe something silly or something kind of unprofessional or even offensive. Just make sure that voicemail message is appropriate. And then email address, if you obviously hopefully go to the University of Louisville, list your school email address, or maybe just your name at Gmail, but nothing crazy, nothing from middle school or earlier on in high school that might be a little bit embarrassing. You want to make sure that it represents you in a professional way. So just a simple email address. The next section, when I work with students, sometimes we utilize this section and sometimes we don't. On a resume that you might have created a little while ago, or even on your resume now, you might see that you might have an objective statement. Frankly, objective statements are a little bit dated, so if mom and dad are telling you to use an objective statement, take it with a grain of salt. Keep in mind that another way that you can represent that information is to have a summary of skills. So like I mentioned, employers don't really have a lot of time to be looking through paragraphs. So if you have things in a bullet point format, it would just be a format that's easier to read. As you move on in your experience and you gain some work experience, it might read what the slide says. So a description of several years within an industry. And then maybe your summary of skills is where you highlight specific achievements or awards that you want that person that's hiring you to see first. Other things you might highlight are relevant classes, projects, skills, and strengths. And I know I see that some of you all have put some questions in there, and I'm just going to get through the resume part and then look at those, and then I'll come back to this. And we'll move on to interviewing. Education is the next section, which all of you will definitely have from high school, and then you'll have from college here in a little bit as well. So you want to highlight what degree you're seeking. And if you have a major, highlight that too. So typically it will be a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science. You might have to ask which one you're pursuing. We could get into a conversation about that later. And then you list what you're majoring in. You list your anticipated graduation date, so whomever is doing the hiring will know that you haven't quite gotten your college education yet, but you're supposed to be done 2018, 2019, whatever. You list where you're attending, and then city and state, and then if your GPA is above a 3.0, you can list that as well. Typically anything below 3.0 is not necessarily terrible, but we just don't want to highlight it as something on your resume. So keep that in mind. Especially for those of you who don't have a lot of work experience, it's a perfect opportunity to list some either related or relevant coursework, so classes that you've taken. Even if you are lucky enough not to have to work during college, I would still definitely utilize this section. And other things you can see on the left-hand side of the slide that you can include are past education or projects, presentations, honors and awards, things like that, or study abroad experience. So we made it through education, and then if you do have work experience, or any experience really, it could even be unpaid or volunteer work. You can include any type of experience in this section. So the most important thing that I would say is to make sure you're highlighting what responsibilities that you had, and then any skills and accomplishments that you had in this position. And so this might include full or part-time jobs, seasonal employment, like I said, volunteer leadership experience. It could really be any experience that you've had. And to show you the way that you can present that information the most professionally, instead of just listing customer service, which is one of those buzzwords that I just tell students to remove from their resume altogether, think about what customer service actually is. It's communicating with people. It's responding to customers' needs, including questions, complaints, and concerns. Can you see how customer service is just kind of too concise in this example, and then listing more professional language just really makes you appear more professional. So that's what I mean by listing those accomplishments, but you have to use those verbs. So responded, or communicated, or monitored. All of these really strong verbs should start each of those bullet points. So another example might be duties included teaching art lessons. Now that's not the worst bullet point I've ever seen, but a more professional way to include more information would be planned and executed meaningful and interactive art activities with 150 students. Do you see how that really paints the picture of what that experience was of teaching art lessons? The other part of this description that's really important is that employers, people that are hiring, like to see quantitative information. So anywhere that you can include numbers, the number of people that you served, is really helpful. Like I said, it kind of paints that picture. So this student wasn't helping one student one-on-one or 5 students, they were helping 150 students. That's a different experience. Okay, we're going through the skills, or the section still, so the next section for you might be the skills section. And there are different types of skills that you can demonstrate in this section. So transferable skills are exactly how they sound. They can be transferred from one experience to another one. So even if you are applying for an internship, or you want to help with biomedical research and you've only worked at Subway, think about what skills can be transferred from your subway experience to biomedical research. So the first one that comes to mind is listed here, communication, being able to communicate with supervisors or people that are below you. Analytical skills, initiative, teamwork, leadership, all of these skills that can be transferred from one experience to another. Something that you can include on a resume, but I would keep to kind of a minimum, are personal traits. So hobbies are not included on resumes anymore. That's another really dated practice, but personal traits do include sometimes transferable skills. So leadership I mentioned, or creativity, a strong work ethic. The reason why I say to keep these to a minimum is because I feel like these can be demonstrated in your experiences. So kind of like I mentioned before, you don't have to say you're a leader, but if you show it through your experiences, that'll leave a better impression to employers. And then knowledge-based skills, which are typically the harder skills. So programs you know how to use, languages you can speak, software, or any mechanical or technical skills you might have. Okay, so, and then you have an involvement section. Once again, some of you might have some of these sections and some of you might not. Like some of you might not have worked before. Some of you might not be quite involved in anything in high school at this point, but when you come to college, hopefully you'll have a rich involvement section. But this really gives you the opportunity to develop your leadership, hopefully here when you're at your U of L. And you can see it's kind of similar to the experience section. So this individual on this resume example was a resident assistant for a residence hall. So you can see that they oversaw 22 first-year students and assisted with their transition to college. Right there, you know, 2 strong verbs describing exactly what they did, and quantitative information, which is perfect. Collaborated with the hall director to provide educational programming to the residents. Another really strong statement, but it's concise and it's short. And then, since they were just a member of, it looks like Lambda Pi Eta, they didn't put a description for that one. So that's one decision you might have to make depending on what experience you had. And then you have an honors and awards section. For some students that I work with, they list their honors and awards directly under education if it's an educational award or honor. But some students I work with have so many that they have a complete section for it. So it's really individual with that. So I talked a little bit about experiential learning. Honestly, these are the types of experiences that are going to make your resume more rich and more extensive than individuals who decide not to get involved. But the other side is actually figuring out what it is you want to do in the future. So once again, I would encourage you to visit your Career Development Center or us to help you figure out what opportunities are really going to help you when it comes to experiential learning. And then we're finally on our last section of the resume, and it's the references section. So references are supposed to be individuals who have seen you in a professional capacity. So unfortunately not a family member typically, even if you worked the family business. It really should be either a boss if you've worked as a supervisor, or it could be a teacher that you've had, an instructor of some sort, a coach. It might be an advisor or a counselor that you've had. I've even seen people put pastors before. So it's just supposed to be someone that doesn't know you on a super personal level, but more of a professional level. So, and that can be a little bit hard. So once again, if you need help kind of defining who that is in your life, please just reach out to us and contact us. And so to list this on your resume, you can just say something like available upon request, or if whomever you're applying for or applying with asks for your references, make sure to just list them out. The magical number for references is 3. That's typically appropriate. So that was a lot of information, so I want to kind of outline some things hopefully that you can take with you, definitely. And the first thing is length of a resume. I get that question a lot. How long should my resume be? That's another thing that's kind of individual, like per person. You all have different experiences and strengths and involvement in different things, but I would say for most students that I work with, at least at the associate or bachelor's level, a one-page resume is appropriate in length. And since we're talking so much about what employers are looking for, they don't have that time to look through pages and pages on a resume. So I would say a one-page resume pretty much all the way around is appropriate. Make sure that when you're formatting, you don't go below a 10-point font because it gets really difficult to read. And don't utilize a Microsoft Office or maybe even a publisher template. They can be really nice looking and really helpful when it comes to starting a resume. So if this is the first time you've created a resume, maybe you start with one of those templates, but I can pick a resume template out of a pile of 10. And sometimes they can be received a little bit negatively by employers. They might think that you're an individual who likes to take shortcuts, or maybe you're not comfortable with Microsoft Office or Publisher or something like that. So just keep that in mind. Just make your own template and maybe use those as a reference tool. When it comes to spacing, if you find yourself off of one page already and you don't even have your college experience on there yet, you can always make your margins smaller, so 1/2 inch is appropriate, and there's a really easy way to find that in Word. And then if you're sending this resume over email, make sure to actually save the document as a PDF. A PDF is a document that you can't mess up the formatting. So if you're emailing it to someone and they open it on their version of Word, all the formatting you just worked on might be all over the place. So if you save it as a PDF, it's a flat document. So that's just a little tip for you. And so this is that full resume sample. Like I said, different opinions on what should go where, but this is what we in the Career Development Center like to impart upon you all. So in experience, skills, sections, involvement, references, and then having that contact information up to date. So I'm going to take a look at some of your questions. All right, I have a question on colors and different fonts. I have gotten this question before in student appointments, and what I will say is that we want to keep resumes consistent, which I've mentioned, and we want to keep them easy to read. So I typically tell students to avoid colors, different colors. Different opinions on that, honestly, but in my experience, in my training, I would say no extra colors. And the fonts can be distracting also, so keep that in mind. We want everything to be really easy to find. I know some people that have made their name in a different font, and when I tried to do that with my supervisor when I was in graduate school, he said absolutely not. So once again, that's the experience that I've had. I would say keep it simple and straightforward. If you know anything about typeface and font, typically sans serif fonts, so the smoother fonts, look a little bit better on resumes. So it might be Calibri, it might be Arial, but those are typically received better. Alrighty, so those are our resume questions for now. If you have other resume questions, please feel free to ask, but we are going to move on to the interviewing techniques. So some of you might have some interviews coming up for scholarships or maybe part-time jobs, full-time jobs, internships, or just actually getting into a college or university. So some things I would say before the interview to pay attention to is to actually do your research. So if you're applying for a job, the first thing you should do is get onto the employer's website and see the things that they value, see what they're posting where, and pay attention to those things. So I would say definitely do the same thing about the college or university and know some of those things, take some of those things away with you. If you can visit the college or university, absolutely do so. So if you're local to that college or university, definitely go and check it out and get a feel for the campus too. The other thing that I would suggest when it comes to interviewing is to complete a mock interview. So typically when you go on an interview, they ask the same types of questions. Maybe not verbatim the exact same questions, but the same types. So they'll typically want to know your strengths and weaknesses, and we'll talk about some of those kind of go-to interviewing questions on the next few slides, but um, they'll typically ask you situational interviewing questions. So what type of experience have you had, or tell me about a time when, and behavior related questions. So I'll go through each of those, but completing a mock interview, honestly, mock interviews are the best thing that I've ever done. I wasn't born with natural interviewing skills. Thinking on my feet is a little bit difficult for me. So if you're one that needs to kind of prepare for things, I would say absolutely complete a mock interview. And if you, I mean, a mock interview could really be with anyone. It could be with a career coach or with a teacher or with just your parent. But actually having to articulate some answers to some of these questions can be difficult. So I would absolutely say to have a mock interviewing experience. And so there are different types of interviews that you might experience. Typically, traditional interviews are one-on-one. So you and the person that's hiring you, or the person that's admitting you to a program or giving you the scholarship, they're more structured. So they're more formal. They have a list of questions in front of them that they're going to ask you, and they're going to read those to you. And it'll be more of a structured conversation rather than just a back and forth conversation. So as it says on the slide, the interviewer will be trying to find out your experiences and your accomplishments and a profile of who you are. And the types of questions that they're going to typically ask you are going to be anywhere from the traditional, tell me about yourself, interviewing questions, situational, so tell me about a time when, and behavioral, which those two can be similar as well. But there are different types of interviews. So a panel interview, for example, typically consists of 2 or more people. I've been in interviews where there have been upwards of 6 or 7 people. So one thing to remember when it comes to panel interviews, and as well as traditional interviews, is to make sure that you go around and you shake every person's hand, and you focus on who asked the question as well. So it's a little bit overwhelming at times in panel interviews because you feel like you have to kind of divide your attention. But just make sure that if they're going around the room and asking you separate questions, that you make eye contact with the person who asked you that question specifically. And a way that you can kind of keep your cool in panel interviews is just to stay relaxed. Keep that focus on each individual, and keep that self-assured attitude, that confidence. If you can try to find out, if you know it's going to be a panel interview, you can always do some probing and try to find out who will actually be doing that panel interview. And what I always do is I always bring either a notebook or a pad of paper into the interview and jot down each of their names at some point. Now I do it subtly, so I don't find out each of their names and write them down immediately, but if you jot them down, we'll talk about writing thank you notes later on, and I don't know about you all, but I'm absolutely awful with names, so it'll help you in the long run just to write those names down. Okay. All right, well, when it comes to other types of interviews, we have phone and web-based interviews. So I don't know if you all have had this experience before, and I didn't mention this, but this is actually my first webinar. Nowadays, you might even have a web-based interview. So whether it's over Skype or Google Plus or Google Hangouts, you might have to find a space where you have a webcam. And so just keep that in mind if you don't have a laptop, if you know anyone with webcam capabilities, that you might have to resort to asking them to utilize this technology. And the other thing that's important about the web-based interviews is making sure that you're in an appropriate environment. So hopefully it hasn't been too distracting for you all when people have been walking by. This is the most appropriate environment for my office, but making sure that there aren't kind of posters in the background, or if you're interviewing in your room, making sure it's not super messy or cluttered, and making sure that, especially for web-based interviews, that you're still dressed professionally. We're not going to get too much into what's appropriate dress for interviews. I mean, I'll briefly say that definitely wearing business professional, so a suit, whether you're male or female, would be appropriate. But even for Skype interviews, everything that they can see should be appropriate and professional, because you're still making that first impression. Now, when it comes to phone interviews, honestly, kind of the same thing, making sure you're in a reliable area, especially if you're on a cell phone, making sure that you're in a quiet area that will get cell phone reception. If you can use a landline, definitely do it. I know they're kind of few and far between now, but definitely having a reliable connection for both Skype and phone interviews. But phone interviews are a little less pressure because you can have your notes in front of you if you want, or your resume, whichever is more appropriate for you. And you can look through and utilize those resources. You can't do that with an in-person interview or Skype or Google Hangout interview. But I would say to still dress professionally, even for a phone interview, which sounds a little crazy, but it can really make a difference in your confidence. So if you just do a phone interview and you're in your pajamas and you just rolled out of bed, you might sound like that. But if you're dressed in a suit or business professional wear, you probably come off a little bit more confident, even just verbally. Okay, all right, make sure, like I said, you're asking questions if you have them throughout. So types of interviewing questions. Talked about this a little bit already, but really kind of 3 different types of interviewing questions. Traditional are tell me a little bit about yourself, tell me your strengths and weaknesses. Situational will be based on past experiences that you've had, situations you've been in. And behavioral can be, like I said, be a little bit similar to situational, where they're trying to see what past behavior you've had in situations, and actually your past behavior predicts your future behavior. So that's the whole point behind some of these, and we're going to go over some examples of what those are. So these are some typical interviewing questions, and I know some of the language might differ for you because you're interviewing either for a scholarship or maybe a part-time job, full-time job experience. So tell me about yourself is one of those questions that, regardless of what the interview was, so if it was for an on-campus leadership position or for this job, I have gotten that question in 100% of my interviews. And it's actually, since I've done so many mock interviews with students, it would be the one that I would absolutely tell you to be prepared for. And especially with that one, students typically ask me, what should I say in that one? And so it's different for every person. Obviously, it depends on what you're interviewing for, but I will say that you should be organized with your response, and it should be concise. So they don't want to know that you like to ride bikes or you like to go swimming or things like that. They want to know why you're there. So why are you here today? What value do you bring to this position or this organization or this scholarship? Why do you deserve it? So you should touch on that in your answer to tell me about yourself as well. And like I said, keep asking questions if you have them. Why do you think you're qualified? What are your strengths? These are questions that you should be able to articulate exactly what they're asking for. So things about yourself that make you a qualified candidate. What your weaknesses are. This is another one that especially stumps students that I work with. Typically they go for the ever popular, I'm a perfectionist, or I work too hard, and things like that. And employers, especially when I'm on a hiring committee, I'm looking for a genuine answer, first of all. And then second of all, you do want to talk about how you're working on it. So if your weakness is that you are completely unorganized and you can't keep a schedule or something like that, first of all, I'm going to say, well, that's a little bit of a red flag. But second of all, I want to see how you're dealing with it. So, do you keep a planner? Do you keep all of your appointments in your phone? Have you used some other resource to help you with your organization? Those are the kinds of things I want to hear about when I'm asking about your weaknesses. Long-term career plans, or plans for college, whatever that might be for you right now. They're really just trying to see that you've thought about it, that you've been mindful, and how this experience or this job might fit into that opportunity. This is a situation or behavioral type question. So someone fails to complete a project on time, how would you deal with this situation? This is one of those situations where you'd actually want to use an interviewing technique called the STAR interviewing technique. And so you want to lay out the situation. You want to give an example of a situation where someone didn't complete a task on time and it negatively impacted you. Describe the task, so whether it was a project at work or at school, describe what that task actually was, and then move into the action. So did you confront the person about it? Did you decide just to do all the work on your own? Did you seek advice from an instructor? Whatever happened with the actions of that situation, and then the results. So this interviewing technique has really helped me stay organized when I'm responding to those behavior-related or situational interviewing questions. So hopefully, while you're doing mock interviews, you can find a way to kind of strategically figure out this interviewing technique for yourself. So we have a couple more questions. I'll go back one slide to find out about, to talk about. So can you provide a specific example when you use good problem-solving skills? This is one of those other questions where your past behavior predicts your future behavior. So if you can recognize, if you're self-aware of problem-solving skills that you have, this would just be an opportunity to verbalize those. And then this last question, once again, I would come prepared for every interview with some questions for the person or people that's interviewing you. So do you have any questions for me, for the organization? And so I always prepare my questions in advance. So, and that's something that I have to do. If you can think well on your feet, absolutely just go right into it with no questions. But I would say prepare your questions in advance just to be safe. Okay, we focused on that one already. And so once again, I just want you to take some things with you in terms of interviewing skills. So things to remember from these. So social media, your internet image, all of these things honestly matter in this day and age. So when I'm interviewing someone for either a student position or even a professional position, first thing I do is Facebook stalk them or just Google their name and see if anything comes up. So just be aware of that. Please monitor the things you're posting on Twitter or Instagram, any of those social media sites. This kind of goes hand in hand with the last question on the list of questions. So asking questions that show your interest in the school or the program or the scholarship, that just shows that you did your research. It shows that you care, that you didn't do this last minute, that you're prepared for this interview. Being honest and being confident, I think there's, once again, kind of strategic ways to do this. I think that there's a kind of a gentle balance between being confident and being arrogant. And so that's why I would stress one more time that having a mock interview would allow you to actually articulate those things that you've accomplished and those things that you're really skilled in. And sometimes that really takes practice to do. So that's why this last bullet point is definitely practice. Writing them down, saying them out loud, saying them to yourself, whatever you need to do. Practicing interviewing is very, very helpful. Okay, so we talked about the top mistakes on a resume, and now the top interviewing mistakes. Dressing inappropriately. Unfortunately, that's not a big topic just due to time that we're going to talk about in terms of interviewing today. But just making sure that your clothes fit well, that you're wearing business professional, so a suit if you can, not wearing jeans regardless of what the interview is for. Keep that in mind. Bad-mouthing a former boss, supervisor, teacher, whatever it might be, that's a mistake, because if this person hires you, chances are you're not going to work for them forever, and they will eventually be a former boss. So it just makes you come off in a really negative light, and that's just a really big faux pas when it comes to interviewing skills. Appearing disinterested, appearing arrogant, once again, I think that's just having self-awareness, and doing those mock interviews can let you know how you come off to an individual. Insufficient answers comes with practice again, and not asking good questions. Almost 30% don't ask good questions when it comes to mistakes. So that can be easily avoided with just some preparation. Alrighty, so after the interview, you're all done, you've answered all the questions, you've asked great questions, and you're leaving. So make sure you thank them, make sure you shake everyone's hand at the end again. The other kind of the best piece of advice that I've gotten about interviews is that you are not done until you have actually left the property. So I've heard horror stories about individuals riding in elevators and talking on the phone or sending a text when someone could see it regarding the interview that they just had. So just make sure that you don't do any of those silly things or make any of those mistakes, but before you've left the company, even if it was the worst interview you've ever had. Make sure you send a thank you note to every person you shook hands with, so every person that was in your interview. Sending a thank you note just makes so much of a difference, just makes so much of an impression on people. And I've been an interviewer more times than I can count, but I can count on my hand the number of times I've gotten a thank you note. So, like I said, it really does make a big impression. And then if you haven't heard anything, like if you were in the interview and they didn't let you know kind of a time at which you might hear a response, you can reach out to them. Definitely follow up. I don't think I would have gotten the opportunities that I've gotten without following up to make sure if they needed any additional information or anything more than my resume. So you can reach out politely, but don't be too crazy about it. Okay, so we've actually come to the end of things. I do have one question on here specifically having to do with the McConnell Scholars Program. And what I will tell you is, unfortunately, I haven't had an experience with McConnell Scholars specifically, but I know that this program is huge at U of L. I mean, it's huge, but it's small. It's been around for several years. So what I would tell you is that would be the perfect opportunity to try to research someone either on LinkedIn that's participated in the program, or someone who's facilitating now, to ask about how you might be prepared for that opportunity. It's a professional group, so I would say no matter what, your attire needs to be professional when you're interviewing. And then it's actually pretty easy to kind of research about the McConnell Scholars Program and the trips that they've taken, and the initiatives that they do, the volunteer work that they do. So I would say know everything that you possibly can about McConnell Scholars. And then if hopefully you're familiar with LinkedIn, you can look and see, you can just type in McConnell Scholar and find other people that have participated in it. And I know my contact's on the screen, so if you want to email me directly, we could actually find someone that you could connect with and talk to them directly about that interviewing process. So I hope that answered your question. We don't have any other questions at this time, so if you have a last minute question, make sure you let me know. Otherwise, if you have any questions that come up, or if I didn't go into depth on something that one of these topics and you want to know more, please feel free to email me. Like I said, I'm in the Career Development Center at the University of Louisville, so I'd definitely be willing to help in any way that I possibly can. So, all right, you all. Well, thank you so much for attending today, and just keep in contact and let me know, and good luck in your college future. All right, thank you.